Hey, welcome back to 65 Drums. My name is Justin. Today I want to do a video about the best electronic drum sets for about $1,800. Here are the three main contenders: the Roland TD17 KVX, the baseline Alesis Strike, and the Yamaha DTX6K3-X. We're going to jump into the pros and cons of each one of these drum sets so you can figure out which one might be right for you, because they're all very, very different from each other. All right, let's start off with the Roland TD17 KVX. The Roland TD17 KVX comes with a 12-inch snare, 8-inch dual zone tom pads, a kick drum pad that can accommodate double kick drum pedals, 12-inch hi-hat, 12-inch crash cymbals, and a 13-inch 3-zone ride cymbal. Unfortunately, there is no hi-hat stand or kick pedal in the box. You'll have to buy those separate. Let's jump ahead into the pros and cons of this drum set. The snare drum is really done well here. I'm not a fan of the cosmetics of the shell itself, but it definitely outperforms other snares in its class. It picks up all the rim shots and buzz rolls. There is no hot spotting because of the sensor placement under the head, and I'm really a fan of the way they design the rim. Unlike the Yamaha snare with its inch-wide rim zone, this one mirrors the height and thickness of a regular acoustic snare rim, even though it's silenced. I like the kick drum. It feels great, and you don't have to fight with it in the trigger settings too much to get it to respond in the right way. One really nice thing about this hi-hat is that they made it lighter than the VH11, so it doesn't weigh down your hi-hat stand as much if the spring isn't quite as powerful as some other stands. The drum module is also solid. You can import samples, you can stack sounds on top of each other, and it has a lot of classic Roland editing controls to tweak the built-in sounds. You get virtual mic placement, virtual room adjustments, you can do things like adjust muffling and the size of the drums or the cymbals. You know the drill by now. This is the only module on the list that has Bluetooth and a built-in mount for your cell phone, which makes it very convenient. You don't have to buy one of those adapters that goes from USB-C over to 1/8 inch or Lightning to 1/8 inch and then an aux cord. Bluetooth is just something that all modules should have by now. The module is also pretty easy to use, even if you don't really know anything about drum modules, because they have a lot of dedicated buttons like muffling, tuning, ambience, and volume. They aren't buried in the menus. And as a whole, this drum set has some of the lowest latency in the industry. Now, as far as downsides, this drum module does come with the fewest sounds of any module in this price range. I like the ones that they've included, but it does have the smallest selection of them. You can't really import that many samples into this drum set, applying them to one pad. Now, I personally don't really import samples into my drum modules that often, but I know for certain kinds of electronic drummers, it's an important feature worth considering. Another thing to note is that the TD17 does not have compression controls built in, everyone else does. The drum sizes of the TD17 are pretty much middle of the pack. You get a larger snare and larger toms than on the Yamaha kit, which is mostly what you notice at a glance between the two of them. But believe it or not, the Yamaha kit does have slightly larger cymbals, except for the ride, which is the same size. I feel like this drum set would have benefited from going from at least an 8-inch floor tom to something a little bit larger. And then of course the Alesis Strike is way bigger than both Roland and Yamaha's offerings. And then finally, the build quality of Roland drum sets is excellent. It sets itself apart from the competition because it just can take a beating. But I do need to mention that I did have a malfunctioning hi-hat on my drum set. Weird double triggering that I couldn't fix inside of the settings of the module. However, I haven't run into that issue on any of the other 6 or so VH10s that I've tested before and since then. So who exactly is the TD17 KVX for? I see this drum set as the balanced middle ground between Alesis and Yamaha drum sets. It does a lot of things right and is an overall good choice for nearly anybody. It's one of those rare drum sets that I could just tell people to buy without needing tons of specific information about the use case and what they want out of a drum set. It can just handle most situations very well. I especially recommend this drum set if you're a venue and you need your drum set to handle a lot of abuse for years in a row. I'm talking about people that are buying something for their small studio that they're building out or for churches. It's a very good drum set for that sort of situation. Next up is the Alesis Strike. So that footage was of the Alesis Strike Pro drum set. It's identical to the baseline version Alesis Strike that we're talking about today, just with a few more pads that up the price tag. So here are the sizes. You get a full acoustic-sized 14-inch snare drum. The tom pads are 8, 10, and 12 inches across. The kick drum is 14 inches across. And for the cymbals, you're getting a 2-piece 12-inch hi-hat set, a single 14-inch crash cymbal, and a 16-inch ride cymbal. Unfortunately, the hi-hat stand is not included with the drum set. You'll have to buy that separate. And in case you're wondering, last time that I talked to an Alesis representative, I was told that this hi-hat would remain the same, and it's not going to be switched over to the new 14-inch version that was introduced on the Strike Pro SE. Alright, so here's what the drum set does right. One of its main strengths is just the size of the components. Getting a full 14-inch snare is way more immersive than playing on an 8-inch one. Having different sized tom pads is also really nice. Alesis is the only drum set company to offer differing sizes on this drum set at this tier. I also really appreciate that larger 16-inch ride cymbal. The module is also incredibly interesting. It's nothing like the TD17 or the DTX Pro modules at all. The Strike is the only module at this tier with faders. It's the only module at this price tier that has individual outputs on the back. It's the only module here that has a whole desktop companion program to go along with it, and the Strike is the only module at this price that gives you a color screen. You can also import samples into this module with a 200 megabyte limit per kit. And the module is smart enough to align them so that the quieter samples are only triggered when you play quieter, and the loud ones are triggered when you play louder. And you have a lot of deep control over all these features inside of the Strike editor for your computer. And while I personally don't love a lot of the sounds that are built into this drum set, it has almost 2,000 sounds built in. That means I don't have to scroll that far to find a kit that I really enjoy playing. Mostly, it's a bunch of the free kits they have with the later software updates that just sound amazing. Meanwhile, some of the older kits are kind of iffy. Alright, so moving ahead to the stuff that I'm not as big of a fan of, you only get one crash cymbal with this drum set. The cymbals are larger than the competition, but you only get one crash. Another slightly irritating thing about the module is the fact that the headphone volume is not as loud as some of the competing drum modules. That's why you always see all those faders at music stores maxed out. And you might question why you would even have faders on a module if you're going to max them all out anyway. But I believe the main workaround to this is just to increase the gain inside of the compression settings, or use a headphone DAC. The kick drum looks solid as a rock, but in real life, it's way lighter than you'd expect it to be. The ride cymbal also doesn't have the greatest reputation as far as its failure rate. And until a pad refresh happened a while back, there was an ocean of complaints about internal trigger plates snapping in half, and it still does occasionally happen. There were also complaints about the drum rack at times as well before that was fixed. Thankfully, Alesis is never hesitant to send out replacement parts, which is why they still have a very passionate fan base to this day, even though the rollout was very rocky. So who exactly is this drum set for? I'd say the baseline Alesis Strike is great for people who prioritize getting large drum sizes above all else when shopping for an electronic drum set. At the end of the day, because of its level of durability, I would say the Strike is a great consumer-grade drum set, and not necessarily something I would recommend to churches or for live touring. It's better for home recording use in my opinion. Next up is the Yamaha DTX6K3-X. So here are the sizes of this drum set. You get an 8-inch 3-zone snare, all the cymbals are 13 inches across, and all of them are 3-zone except for the 2-zone hi-hat. The kick drum is 7.5 inches across, and the toms are 7 inches across, and they are single zone. So here's what I like about this drum set. The cymbals are very well built, and all the crashes and hi-hat are larger than the ones on the Roland drum set, believe it or not. The snare has a dedicated rim click zone that's very useful to cross-stick players and doesn't require you reaching over and pressing some sort of mode button on the module to activate it like some modules do. The overall build quality of this drum set is on par with the Roland TD17 KVX, and is definitely a step above the build quality of the Alesis Strike. The module is excellent. Now of course, sound is very subjective, but I personally think the DTX Pro module sounds more natural, powerful, and punchy than the ones inside of the TD17. The module also includes a real room mic volume control knob and a compression control knob that's very easy to use, along with transient, EQ, head size, cymbal size, and muffling controls. Just like the TD17, the DTX Pro module lets you record right and left audio tracks over USB without needing to use an audio interface, or some cheap dongle like iRig. The click section of this module is much more in-depth and more powerful than the competing drum modules. This is the only drum set on the list that actually includes the hi-hat stand in the box. This saves you $80, and it's one of those hidden costs of buying an electronic drum set you don't have to worry about when you buy this kit. And finally, I like the fact that this is a fairly quiet drum set because of the playing surfaces on the snare and toms. And of course, the smaller the drum set is, the quieter it will generally be. Okay, so now let's move ahead to the weaknesses of this drum set. And the first one really sticks out like a sore thumb. This drum set has a ridiculously small 8-inch snare drum. Now I personally think that you can get away with smaller tom pads, but if you don't throw on that larger snare drum like Roland did, let alone comparing it to the Alesis Strike snare drum, which is the same size as an acoustic snare, you end up getting the impression when playing this drum set that Yamaha was holding back. Also, I believe the snare drum uses a piezo switch trigger design. This trigger design is fine for when you're hitting rim shots because you're generally playing fairly hard. But I found when playing cross stick with that second rim zone, my softer hits didn't always trigger a rim click sound because you aren't fully pressing down on the switch membrane inside of the pad. The DTX Pro module is compatible with mesh pads and mesh triggers, but because of the internals of the module, you won't get every single zone working on non-Yamaha cymbals. You can get a zone or two working on crashes, but the hi-hat and ride cymbal, because of the way they're designed, you have to stick with Yamaha branded cymbals. I also found that the kick drum, which feels great by the way, is a tad finicky when you're setting it up. If you don't get it just right when centering the pad and also adjusting trigger settings, your right and left beaters will have drastically different volumes while playing. Another thing that you notice is that this is the only drum set on the list that doesn't give you rim zones on the toms, which I find to be very strange. It's nice to have rim zones in case you want to put a cowbell or a shaker on one of them, or to have a couple of invisible crashes on the toms, which can be useful as well. And the final weakness of the drum set is the fact that it doesn't use mesh heads. Now I'm personally fine with this because I like the DTX silicone pad material, but according to a poll that I did on my YouTube channel, 85% of the 2,000 drummers polled prefer mesh heads, over the 11% of drummers that prefer the DTX playing surface. So who's this drum set for? I personally think the DTX6K3-X is for electronic drummers that prioritize a more compact setup, high quality components, and a more natural punchy sounding drum module. This drum set is not for drummers that want to have a more acoustic sized design, and it's not for drummers that want to use a drum set where they can't use Alesis or Roland cymbals if they want to upgrade in that direction in the future. So one thing to mention about all these drum sets is that they have completely different sonic palettes. None of these modules sound alike. Alesis has their particular sound, the Yamaha drum module has a particular punchy sound to it, and Roland has the Roland sound that we all know and either love or hate, depending on who you are. So you kind of have to play these in person to really get a feel for which one might be right for you. They all feel different, they're just completely different drum sets that are sort of aimed at different drummers. I went out and bought the Roland TD17 KVX. I found an amazing deal on Facebook Marketplace and picked one up for $1,000. I always recommend checking out the used market and trying it out in person to make sure it's in working condition before you buy one, but you can save a ton of money. If you do want to buy one of these drum sets and you prefer buying them new, I have some links down in the description that support the channel at no cost to you if you decide to use them. Have an amazing day. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. And a big shout out to Derek Frampton for supporting 65 Drums over on patreon.com. I really appreciate the support over there. And if you guys would like to join the Patreon, you'll get early access to videos as well as some other perks as well. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in a few.